The larynx is the voice box, what we use to speak, and it resides at the entrance to the trachea, which is the tube that we breathe through. In the last episode of this series, I asked when you want your larynx to be pulled up and when you want it to be low. You may have never intentionally moved your larynx before, but you certainly have moved it many times. When it comes to this area of the body, the mouth and throat region, there are two major activities that occur here. First, there is the swallowing of food, and that is of course an essential activity that we all partake in. Second, there is breathing, and by speaking, another important set of activities that are performed with many of the same parts of the body. These two modes of using the mouth and throat are in a sense incompatible. That is, you cannot swallow and breathe at the same time. The reason for that is pretty simple, and it involves the lifting and lowering of the larynx. First, let's examine swallowing. When you swallow food, what happens is that once the food is chewed up in your mouth, your tongue rises to the roof of your mouth to block off the oral cavity. Your soft palate rises to block off the nasal cavity. That leaves only one direction for the food to go in. But of course, remember we have both the trachea and the esophagus down the throat. We are in a bit of danger here. If that food goes into the trachea, we're in for a bad time. To keep food out of our airway, we close the epiglottis over the larynx, shutting off the trachea. To do this, we raise the larynx, so it's simply an observable fact that your larynx will go up when you swallow. This is a very crucial set of movements to get right. If food gets into your airway, which can happen, it can cause serious problems like pneumonia. It's also a problem to swallow air down your esophagus, which is called aerophagia. These are nasty problems that we really don't want, so it's a good idea to understand this area of your body. The conditions for breathing are just about opposite to the conditions for swallowing. We don't want the nasal cavity shut off by the soft palate. We don't want the tongue blocking the oral cavity, and we want to keep the larynx low so that the airway is open. Francois Delsarte, who was a great singer, and the singers of the bel canto system, both emphasized that you want to keep your larynx low while singing. When you sing, you're using your larynx and your body as an instrument. In order to get the best sound out of your instrument, you want to lengthen the tube you're projecting the sound through, which is your pharynx. If we keep the head high, that is forward and up, while keeping the larynx low, you will maximize your ability to produce good, clear sounds whether singing or speaking. It should be clear that we don't want to raise the larynx while speaking, singing, or breathing because lifting the larynx is associated with swallowing mode, and when swallowing, the airway needs to be closed. This leads us to another consideration. When we're breathing or speaking, we want the larynx to be pulled back, not forward. If you allow your larynx to habitually go forward, you're kinking your airway and opening your esophagus. That can lead to problems like acid reflux. Now you may be thinking, isn't swallowing done automatically? How does conscious guidance apply to an instinctual act like this? Well, we're not going to be directing the swallowing act specifically, but we do want to get the body in the best position to be able to speak, breathe, or swallow when appropriate. What that means is that we want the larynx to be properly suspended. Here, we need to look at one bone in the head and neck area that I've neglected to mention, which is the hyoid bone. This bone is not connected to any other bone. It is suspended at the front of the larynx. We have muscles that go up from the hyoid and larynx to the head, and we have muscles that go down. Our goal will be to lengthen these muscles and the related fascia so that they're taut, and the hyoid and larynx are properly suspended. There are people who have breathing troubles, and there are also cases where people come to have difficulties with swallowing, and they have to retrain themselves to some degree how to swallow. What's best in all of these situations is to properly suspend the larynx and hyoid by lengthening the muscles and fascia. Doing so will help us efficiently perform in both breathing mode and swallowing mode. Let's think about this idea of lowering the larynx. We do not want to do that at any cost. If the head comes down at all, we will be losing the tautness above the hyoid. But it's not just if the head comes down. If the head comes back, you will again be shortening these muscles. So the head needs to stay forward and up, while the hyoid and larynx stay back and down. Don't worry about swallowing. If you're lengthening these muscles and fascia, your automatic swallowing will also improve, because the muscles can act efficiently. Now, how do we lengthen the muscles and fascia below the hyoid and larynx? We can't pull the sternum and clavicles down, as doing so would shorten the torso. We don't want to lengthen the neck at the expense of shortening the torso. Here, I'll briefly make a point about traditional stretches and exercises. Often, there will be a procedure for stretching a specific muscle, and to do so, you shorten in other spheres so that you can maximally lengthen the one muscle that you're stretching. I don't think that's really a sensible idea. Our goal should not be to stretch out one muscle individually while coordinating that stretch with other shortening movements. We want lengthening everywhere. We want the maximum amount of lengthening without shortening somewhere else to compensate. Doing that requires us to coordinate multiple lengthening movements together. We saw this problem before with the chin tucks that stretch the back of the neck and head, but induce a shortening of various muscles in the neck and torso. Last episode, we looked at a better procedure for lengthening the neck. In that video, I listed out a whole slew of considerations to bear in mind while doing that adjustment. I also explicitly stated that keeping the back lengthened while doing the adjustment is more important than actually moving the head forward to lengthen the neck. It's better to get less of a stretch with a lengthened torso than more of a stretch by shortening the torso. Typical stretches and exercises don't consider all the other lengthening movements of the body that need to be coordinated with the stretch or exercise you're trying to do. A typical chin tuck explanation has no mention of what should happen with your back. And if you look at typical examples, people frequently keep their ribcage tilted back during the exercise, or tilted back even more. Individual stretches like this are essentially useless. To make sustainable changes in your posture, you need to coordinate multiple lengthening movements together. In order to stretch the muscles below the hyoid and larynx, we need to extend the neck. By moving the head very far up and forward, we can pull the whole throat area up away from the ribcage. There's also this muscle at the lower end of the hyoid called the omohyoid muscle. This funny muscle connects to the shoulder blade. If you're familiar with anatomy, you've likely come across this muscle because it's a bit odd. If you're not too familiar with anatomy, you might not have known you have a muscle that connects your shoulder blade to your larynx. Another curious fact about this muscle is that it has a tendon in the middle. Most muscles have tendons on either end. They go tendon, muscle, tendon. But this one goes tendon, muscle, tendon, muscle, tendon. What is this muscle for? How are your shoulder blades affecting your voice box? Give it some thought and then join me next episode, and we'll explore this area of the body further.